The main events, major plot twists, shocking facts about some characters, references to the new episode, and much more you will see in this video. Welcome to the second episode of the amazing digital circus, and in this video, we're going to talk about what Gummigoo's real purpose was, what happens to Candy Kingdom in the end, who turned out to be the main character of the new episode, and much more. And right away, we are greeted by a scene where Pomni gradually regains consciousness after the first day in the digital circus, and we notice how Pomni starts to turn into an abstracted monster like Kaufmo used to be. The circus trio makes Pomni more and more nervous, but after a couple of seconds we realize that 99% of the fans were right, and the whole abstraction show was just a dream that Pomni had after the pilot episode. Ragatha knocks on Pomni's door, and, most likely, she is the one who woke up our jester. And before informing that Kane is preparing everyone for a new mission, Ragatha apologizes to Pomni for the scene that almost turned Pomni into an abstracted monster. And as soon as Kane gathered all the residents together, he immediately told them that Candy Career Chaos would be their new challenge, and the main task would be to get back the maple syrup that Gummigoo and his partners Max and Chad had stolen. Zooble decided not to change her traditions, and as in the pilot episode, simply refused to take part in the new adventure, which greatly upset Kane, and all his pleas and entreaties were useless because in the end Zooble left. And realizing that the other residents of the circus, including Pomni, can simply refuse to Kane, decided against their will to send all the residents to the kingdom, and then we were shown a huge territory of this location. But most of all, I was amused by these gummy worms that look a lot like the characters from Slither.io. We understand that Fudge Monster is the #1 enemy in the city, and it should not be frightened under any circumstances. And we are also shown a huge crowd of NPCs who are very excited that now they have new characters in the kingdom. And judging by the route that dummies lined up in a line about 1 kilometer long, which is very much admired. However, while all the residents were happily watching at Candy Castle, one of the dummies shoved Gangle, which caused the comedy mask that was originally on Gangle to break again. But the reason for this behavior is Princess Lulilalu, or just Lu, because she asked to call herself that. She also mentions Kane as her god, which finally confirms that absolutely everyone in the kingdom is an NPC that is 57 times better than Gloinks. Princess Lu immediately befriends Ragatha and praises her behavior, which tells us that this character was quite possibly copied from Ragatha. And also the very key that has not given us repentance for a long time also revealed its secret, and we learn that it simply opens the gate to the city, but it should never be given to anyone, because if it falls into the wrong hands, it could very well be a disaster, which is what happened in the end, but more on that later. Lu also mentioned that Gummigoo and his gang stole maple syrup and drove off in a truck, and to even the odds the princess gave the circus people a similar truck that Jax immediately wanted to drive. And this once again proves to us that Jax is an egoist who doesn't respect other people's opinions. But this capricious rabbit did not like the horn, and he immediately gave the control of the truck in the hands of Gangle, who just broke his mask. Then, we were shown the lair of alligators, and between them, there was an amazing conversation from which we learn that they need maple syrup to save their village. And also we learn that Gummigoo is very loyal to his mom, and wants to return her by all means. All in all, everything was fine until Jax decided to go rogue again and started thinking he was in charge, and the main victim was Pomni, who he just threw out, which led to Pomni repeating the famous video. However, it was obvious that Pomni would not be able to stay in that position for long and would fall sooner or later, but that didn't stop Jax, who decided to shoot at Max with his weapon. As a result, Max fell out, and Gummigoo decided to use Plan B and turned to the dangerous road with rocks. Max was the one who got hurt the most, and this is where the most amazing thing starts. Pomni struggles to keep himself alive while Jax again catches a note of selfishness and orders Gangle to ram the alligator truck under the pretext of revealing her big secret, which was a bad idea from the start. And since we see that the spikes were only discovered after such a drastic act, we realize that Gummigoo didn't plan to kill or harm our characters in any way, and his only goal was to get the syrup back to the village. But only because of Jax's stupidity, Pomni was on the verge of death 2 times, and that's very serious. But as we know, Kinger is very unpredictable, and his sick brain decided to drop anchor to help Pomni. And of course, it didn't help, but made the whole situation worse. After all, the circus gang flew into the abyss and started falling into the chocolate river where someone lives. But I'm sure everyone will know who we're talking about. But something terrible happened to the alligator truck and Pomni herself, and if Max and Chad just flew off, Pomni and Gummigoo fell through the textures. And this is the 4th time the creators directly tell us how unideal the digital circus is. And now we see Gummigoo falling into some abyss, and realize that this is the so-called dungeon, which in the pilot episode was this weird gray room with many rooms. And after a long time of searching for someone, Gummigoo finds himself in a strange place that holds the avatars of all the characters involved in Candy Castle, including himself. And that's when it's revealed to us that this mysterious frame was just Gummigoo's eye. And just at that moment, Pomni also appears in the shot, and there is a dialogue between the two of them, where Gummigoo realizes that the whole circus gang is not just ordinary NPCs, even though he doesn't know the word. Pomni's words startle him, and he starts thinking about his mother and realizes that he doesn't know anything about her and doesn't even remember what she looks like. And then, the original image of the fudge monster appears in front of us. Then Jax and the others swim out from under the water, and the rabbit says some very funny words about how they look like Augustus Gloop, who likes chocolate a lot. After a couple of moments, the fudge monster himself appears before our eyes and introduces himself simply as Fudge. And there was no limit to his joy because for the first time he got someone just like that, and he was ready to eat absolutely everyone, including the truck, as Regatha completely changes the course of events and informs that all of them are not made of candy. And this confused Fudge so much that he refused to eat them simply because he can't, or rather, he is not programmed to. And then we realize that Cain is actually not so terrible as they think about him, because this scene meant 100% death of everyone present, but Cain thought about this moment in advance and reinsured himself, which means that he really cares about the fate of the circus inhabitants. And then Fudge starts his story that a long time ago he lived among all the NPCs in the city, but at one point, Princess Lulilalu decided to banish him, then very much offended our monster, and at the same time offended so much that he was mercilessly eating all the other NPCs just for fun, and he is very pleased to remember their screams. What if Gummigoo and his gang of alligators stole maple syrup to give to Fudge, and in return, the great and terrible monster wouldn't touch their village? This is most likely the exact scenario that was spelled out in their actions. And also Fudge's words that eating is not murder amused Jax very much, but at the same time made Regatha very angry. And Kinger mentioned for fun that this is the second time Pomni has missed a meeting with Monster. In the pilot episode, it was Gloink's Queen, and in the second episode, it was Fudge. And it was at this point that Jax realized that their new adventure could be very, very exciting. However, our heroes don't forget their main mission, and Jax thought it would be fun to propose a favorable exchange. He gives the key to Fudge, and in return he helps them find the alligator gang. But I don't think this was done to save the maple syrup at all, but just to humor Jax. However, this exchange was not destined to take place because at the same moment, the alligators fell right in front of them, and there was no need to exchange for someone else. Then we see Pomni and Gummigoo again, and we can see how much Gummigoo is upset, and how Pomni tries her best to help him cope with the new reality, and she even offers him to become a new member of the digital circus. This scene is also notable because we learn that Pomni still remembers who she is and where she came from. And despite a very long negotiation and persuasion, Pomni still manages to convince Gummigoo to become her friend and join her in the digital circus. And we also realize that Pomni is actually a very clever girl who, thanks to her intelligence, was able to save them from being in this so-called dungeon, and a long way to freedom awaited them, as we saw in these shots. And as luck would have it, their truck fell on Fudge's head and caused changes in his body. And looking at this scene, a similar situation from the pilot episode comes to mind. Then there were not very significant events, but the main one is Sad Jax, who is very upset that his new friend has disappeared, and now his adventure has turned into a boring journey again. And also, I want to remember the fragment where Kinger directly says that he is not worried about Pomni at all, because he knows that in case of a real threat, Cain will save her, and apparently with Kinger himself, such situations have already happened. And here comes the parting scene in which Lou thanks us for our bravery and help. And everything would have been fine, but Jax wouldn't be himself if he hadn't tripled some bad behavior. And this time, he left the gates of the city open, and we hear Fudge approaching and ready to avenge all his wrongs. And I think Candy Canyon Kingdom will be completely destroyed after this. Well, Pomni is very happy to have a new friend that Cain quickly removed from the digital circus, making Pomni suffer even more. And a very funny part is the scene in which Jax loses his mouth, and the episode ends with a classic eulogy for the abstracted character that was Cuffmo in the pilot. And I'm 100% sure that the main character Gooseworx wanted to reveal is Pomni. After all, we have seen how real she is and how kind and brave she can be. And as the creators promised us, the episode turned out to be much more epic than we could even imagine. The most touching and probably the most memorable scene from the new episode of Digital Circus is definitely the meeting of Pomni and Gummigoo under the map. And also the last teaser memorized me one detail that completely proves everything I will say later. And even though everything seems clear, there's a lot more to their conversation than meets the eye. So let's find out what really happened between Pomni and Gummigoo. Gummigoo is one of the many NPCs that Kane creates specifically for various adventures. Initially, we introduced him as a villain who stole maple syrup from the Candy Kingdom, but then we realized that his mother and many of his villagers are sick, and only the syrup can help them cope with the disease. And this already shows him as a brave hero who risked everything to help his friends and family. We already know a lot about Pomni, but it is in the scenes under the map that she is fully revealed to us, and we realize what she is. Until the moment of meeting with Gummigoo, Pomni was very sullen, and even at the moment of getting under the map, we see the confusion on her face. And the alligator himself was also very frightened, especially when he saw the figures of all the characters who are the main characters of the kingdom. But he was scared most of all by his figure, and that's when he finally stopped understanding what was going on. And what would Jax or anyone else do in Pomni's place? They would just silently try to get out. Pomni starts talking to Gummigoo, and it's obvious that she's embarrassed to tell him that they're under the map because she knows what it means, and Gummigoo has no idea what it means. And while the alligator is trying to figure out why only the kingdom's inhabitants are here, we see how scared Pomni is, because by that point she still thinks Gummigoo is a terrible robber who would sacrifice Pomni for a cause. And even at the moment of the answer, we see Pomni's body shaking with fear. But she gathered all her courage and told the truth that Gummigoo and all the others are just ordinary game NPCs that don't exist. These words literally pissed off Gummigoo, which also made Pomni feel tense. But the moment when the alligator talked about his mother was the turning point in their relationship, because it was then that Pomni realized that Gummigoo is not really an emotionless NPC, but a game character of the best quality who is able to feel and analyze. When the situation reached a critical point and Gummigoo began to feel short of air, Pomni decided to calm him down and tried to change the subject of the conversation, and the unusual thing happens for NPCs. Gummigoo asked Pomni to tell the truth about him, and by the expression on Pomni's face, we realize that she is both sad and scared to open her eyes to the alligator about everything that is happening. However, we are not shown the scene of this conversation, but I am sure that this conversation was very hard for both Pomni and Gummigoo, and we see the result already at 15 minutes into the episode. Let's think a bit about what could have happened at that moment that Pomni turned from a distrustful character towards Gummigoo into the kindest and most sympathetic person in the world, and Gummigoo became very sad. I think that Pomni came to tell who NPCs are and why they are created. She told that his whole life is unreal, including the memories of his mother, his village, and his friends. All of this is simply not, and never was, and of course this information made the alligator sink into a deep depression from which it was not so easy to get out. However, this is the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship, as we see Pomni shaming Gummigoo for not helping her, but distracting herself to talk to Gummigoo about what's bothering him. And even though Gummigoo didn't see the point of talking at all because of all the above, Pomni didn't abandon him to save him, and listened attentively. And we see how difficult and awkward it is for her to start a conversation that feels like it's already doomed to fail. Pomni is actually a pretty good psychologist, because she starts the conversation by comparing herself to herself and explaining that resentment, abandonment, and desolation are normal for sentient characters, and reminds Gummigoo of Max and Chad, who are still up there somewhere, and they're worried about Gummigoo. And then we hear a sad speech from Gummigoo in which he realizes that they are just a part of the circus characters' lives that they won't remember when they get home. And maybe these touching words were the start of Pomni's friendship with the alligator, because after that, she tried her best to cheer Gummigoo up. But more importantly, Pomni felt a warmth in her soul, and her pupils dilated as much as the moment she thought she could find a way out of the digital circus in the pilot episode. And so we understand that Pomni was now in that moment feeling the utmost pleasure at the mere thought that there might be someone in the circus who could be her support, but more importantly, be her friend, a real friend, not someone like Jax or Kinger, though her attempts were unsuccessful at first, because Gummigoo still didn't want to admit that anyone wanted him. She kept trying to convince the alligator to go to the digital circus with her. And when she finally succeeded, she felt the utmost satisfaction that now she will have a friend with whom she is happy. But unfortunately, she doesn't know what's in store for their duo at the digital circus. From the look in her eyes, you can tell that she felt something more than friendship. Maybe it's a kinship, maybe it's a crush. You can't say for sure because it's a digital circus and you can't be sure of anything, but there was definitely a good feeling in both characters. Gummigoo finally realized what's worth living for, and Pomni just found a character she's comfortable with. And then they even start joking around with each other, and there's no fear or apprehension anymore. And even when they are very scared, they are still just happy to be together. And it seems to me that even if there was no one else in the digital circus but them and Kane, it would still be a great place for Pomni, even though everything around her is unreal. And already during the meeting with everyone, we realize that Pomni and Gummigoo have finally become close to each other. And when Pomni informs everyone that Gummigoo is going with them, Ragatha was clearly surprised and as if she was against it, and most likely because she knew exactly what would happen next, because it is likely that similar situations have already happened in the circus before. And this awkward pose of Pomni at the moment of the conversation is very funny to me. And then came the most tragic moment of the second episode, and we saw how Cain destroyed Gummigoo in front of Pomni's eyes and thus finally destroyed all her plans, goals, and dreams. Pomni realized that her whole plan was nothing, and her false hopes made it worse not only for her, but also for Gummigoo, who also got the hope for a happy life in the future, in the digital circus, among the others. And if Jax wasn't too happy about it, then the others would be able to accept it gladly. And we see how Pomni was in a short depression after the loss of her best friend, and only the feeling of support from the others helped her to get out of this horror. And also the last teaser tells a lot about the relationship between Pomni and Gummigoo, because if in the final scene of the episode we saw only Kaufmo's funeral, in the teaser while everyone is celebrating the end of the adventure and enjoying sweets, Pomni herself took a picture of Gummigoo, which she put next to Kaufmo's picture, and alone memorializes her best friend, who literally in a day became her closest friend in the digital circus. Let's fantasize a little and imagine what could have happened if Cain had not been so principled or had simply not noticed Gummigoo. I think that Pomni would have hidden him in her room and they would have spent all their time together, playing, chatting, and just laughing and making friendly jokes at each other. And maybe then Pomni's life in the digital circus wouldn't be as gray as it is now. But even though Gummigoo is no longer with us and probably never will be, in our hearts, and especially in Pomni's heart and memory, he will remain forever. Maybe she will hang a poster of him in her room, or have Cain make a Gummigoo toy so that Pomni can always remember and feel the warmth she felt when she was around that beautiful alligator. But let's see if Gummigoo has a chance to return. In one of the scenes, Ragatha said that Cain likes to repeat NPCs in different adventures, so if Gummigoo is an NPC, it's likely that we'll see a small reference to the alligator in episode 7 or 8, and I'm sure it will make Pomni remember all the good things that happened to her in the second episode. However, there is one very crazy theory that came to light right after the teaser. Maybe Gummigoo is a person who has been living in the circus for a long time, and Cain doesn't show him for the sake of experimentation to see how the character behaves in complete loneliness, and only sometimes gives him the opportunity to participate in adventures while substituting his memory with what he will instill in him. After all, who would organize an NPC funeral? Maybe this is a hint to confirm this theory, but it seems to me that this is just a sweet fantasy invented by fans to avoid the fact that Gummigoo is dead forever and we will never see him again. What do you think about this theory and the relationship between Pomni and Gummigoo in general? Would they be able to live happily for the rest of their time in the digital circus, or at some point in their friendship there would be a crack and they would become enemies for each other? Although we have seen a lot about Jax, many people still misunderstand him, and because of that make him out to be something he is not. And in this video we will finally reveal in detail who he really is and what the future holds for him. The character of Jax. In the pilot episode we saw that Jax was funny, crazy, a little cowardly, but at the same time, he really liked to make evil jokes on the others, to bully and disturb the peace of life. But it was the second episode that showed us the whole essence of Jax. I would even say his animal gut. We learned that there was almost nothing left of Jax's past, and now he was given a free hand to do what he did and took advantage of it, which we saw in many scenes. Jax at the beginning of their journey was very happy about that, and even tried to convince Zubul to go on a new adventure with them. But Jax was especially happy when he found out that they had to find a gang of robbers and they were going to do it in a truck. But as soon as he didn't like something, he immediately put Gangle behind the wheel. And with the course of the whole chase, Jax's madness became more and more. And finally, it came to the point that he started to threaten and blackmail Gangle, and we will talk about the situation with Pomni. But as soon as they failed, the joy on Jax's face was replaced by sadness. And I'm sure that it was not the fact that they were on the verge of death, but the fact that such an exciting adventure was over. Then there was a meeting with Fudge Monster, which cheered Jax up, but he was especially delighted to learn that Fudge had eaten a huge number of NPCs for fun, and he liked to remember their screams and the terror in their eyes. And already at this point we realize that Jax is not just a bully who likes to make fun of others, real sadist who is happy to feel the pain and horror of other characters. But as soon as something went wrong and the situation in the kingdom calmed down again, it plunged Jax into depression, from which they tried to get him out, but it was unsuccessful. This state of Jax continued until he came up with a way to amuse himself, and in the end, he created chaos in the kingdom, which caused genuine satisfaction, and in the end, we realized that Jax had a successful day, which is shown in this scene. But still, we also saw a note of uncertainty and some doubt in Jax. And the moments where Jax considers himself to be in charge are also revealing. This is clearly visible in the chase and in the moment with the binoculars, which Jax brazenly took away. These situations once again confirm the selfishness and disregard for other people's wishes. Summing up about the character of Jax, we can say that this guy is not really an ordinary joker or hooligan, but a real maniac who hides under the mask of a funny rabbit. But in his heart, all his dreams are only suffering and pain of others. And for the sake of it, he is ready to do anything. And if before it was localized, now his crimes have become a mass character. And I was correct in calling all of his actions crimes. And the first thing Jax did when he saw that they were given the truck was to run and take the driver's seat, thus confirming his status as an egoist who doesn't care about the desires of others. And then, after the disappointment, he forcibly put Gangle in the truck, even though it was obvious that she didn't want it. Then the most significant act was the mocking of Pomni when Jax, because of his crazy ideas, decided that throwing Pomni on a neighboring truck would be a good idea. In the end, it almost got Pomni killed, for which she was rude to the bully. Well, without rude blackmail also did not do without, and the victim was already familiar to us in this role, Gangle. And the object of blackmail was some figurine, and apparently still in the digital circus, Jax helped Gangle to hide something, and in the end, she fell into eternal captivity to him. But that's just the beginning, and his most brutal crimes begin a little later. The meeting with Fudge Monster became the key event in revealing Jax's identity, and we have already said a little about it. But everyone remembers the fragment where Jax and Fudge Monster made a deal, in which Fudge was to help catch alligators and take them out of the abyss, and in exchange for this, Jax would give the key to the city that Fudge needed for revenge for past offenses. And at the time of the deal, Jax was very excited and happy, and I think it was not because they would finally be able to get out of the abyss and find the robbers, but because of what would happen next. As we know, the help in catching the alligators was not needed, so Jax could have defaulted on his commitments. But for our rabbit, it would not be interesting, and here we are approaching the main crime of Jax, because of which he can be punished. And the degree of punishment depends on Kane's wishes. Jax has committed mass murder at Candy Canyon Kingdom, and you can argue that he did nothing with his own hands, but look at the excitement and happiness he felt when he realized that he left the gates to the city open for a reason, and realized that this terrible voice is his old friend Fudge, who will destroy the entire kingdom in the next hour. And here there is a dilemma, because no one knows the fate of the kingdom after the end of the test, and it is likely that it just disappeared and no one was hurt. But none of us, including Jax, know this for sure, which means that the rabbit already had a plan to wreak havoc in the kingdom and was well aware of the consequences for all its inhabitants after his so-called jokes. I'm sure that if Jax knew that the location would disappear after the adventure was over, he would have just closed the door, but he was sure that there would be ruins left behind. And this says about Jax only that he is a sadist and a killer who for the sake of his pleasure is ready to sacrifice absolutely anyone, and he does not care who it will be, an ordinary NPC or a living person. And his attitude towards everyone is expressed in his behavior. We have partially told about his behavior in the chapter about the character, but the important difference is that here we will compare his attitude to the others and remember a little bit of the pilot episode. From the previous chapter, we learned that Jax is ready to sacrifice thousands of characters just for a moment's pleasure, and he doesn't feel a single drop of regret for his actions. And in contrast to him, we can say about Pomni, who also has a huge influence on the second episode. When Pomni and Gummigoo, who is also not a living character but an ordinary game NPC, get into the back room, Pomni, instead of mocking the fact that the alligator found out that everything he remembered and knew simply doesn't exist, on the contrary, tries to somehow support him, calm him down, befriend him, and it seemed to me that she even took a friendly liking to him. Or the same Regatha, when she found out about the monstrous events in the kingdom because of Fudge, she could not find words to describe it while Jax was happy with such news. But the most important thing was hidden at the end of the second episode, but we'll discuss it after a little nostalgia for the pilot episode. Right away we remember how Jax mocked Pomni at the time when she first got into the circus, and while everyone else was somehow trying to convince her that it wasn't that bad, Jax was directly telling her that she was close to going crazy, or how he dumped the girls when he was scared of Kaufmo and then talked to Kinger and Gangle in a mocking manner. I'm not even talking about his attitude towards Gangle, because you already know that she is his main target, not only in the pilot, but also in the second episode. And now, the most important scene that showed the essence of Jax's attitude to all the other characters. Remember the scene of Kaufmo's funeral in the beginning? Everyone was talking to each other and trying to explain to Pomni what was going on. Jax was standing there, and I thought he was a little sad about the funeral, but I think it's a little bit different. Look how he was leaving at the end, and you can see on his face that he is not happy that everyone is getting closer and closer to each other, but there is no room for Jax among them. But objectively, he is to blame for all of this, and instead of coming to his friends, he just walks away and nobody cares about him. And we see Jax getting more and more alienated from the others, and everyone mentally feels it, especially Pomni, who experienced a hallucination and saw the support from everyone in the circus, from Ragatha, Gangle, Kinger, and even the very harsh Zubul. But Jax is again not present here, and here we realize that Jax is a recluse and a maniac who could quite possibly become a major threat to everyone else. Well, before now, it's time to recognize that Jax could very realistically become the main antagonist in the digital circus. He's a terrible friend, an unreliable comrade, a bully, a joker in the worst sense of the word, and a real sadist who apparently doesn't need anyone's support, and because of that, he allows himself much more than everyone else. Or on the contrary, Jax is too much in need of attention and tries to attract the attention of others with all his actions. But in any case, both options lead to the inevitable, the complete negation of the rabbit by all the other characters, and as a result, a possible abstraction. And that means he will have nothing to lose, and the scale of his jokes and actions with each episode will be bigger and bigger, and the destruction of Candy Kingdom may seem like a child's prank. But before that, we will see a lot more about this amazing character. The last thing we saw of Jax was his stealthy exit from Kaufmo's funeral. But what happens next? If you think about it, Pomni is the kind of character that gathers and binds others around him. And of course, Jax won't like that. He just wants chaos around everyone, even though he doesn't say it directly and doesn't show it. I think that further he will start to humiliate and abuse the others more openly, and especially Gangle, or on the contrary, he will use her constantly blackmailing her with that figure. Jax may abstract it already in episode 3, and this is hinted at by the events of the pilot and second episode, as well as some official concepts. In the pilot episode, we saw that Jax is a cheerful bully whose actions, although a little bit angry, can still cause a smile. However, in the second episode, this guy is revealed to us from a completely different side, and we see a rude maniac who is ready to sacrifice everything for his pleasure, and he absolutely does not care what will be the consequences. And if the bullying of Gangle has already become a common phenomenon, then the opening of the gate for Fudge Monster completely confirmed the fact that there is something wrong with Jax. Also very important is the final scene where we saw Kaufmo's funeral, and that Jax is a bit sad that no one cares about him. So in just 2 episodes, we saw a huge range of emotions and actions from Jax, and that uncertainty makes you wonder. If we look at Ragatha, it's obvious that she is an insecure but at the same time very kind character. Or Kinger has always been a bit strange, and we know it for sure, but we can't say anything definitive about Jax. And this is the first signal, because Kaufmo also, before he started to turn into an abstracted monster, behaved very strangely and constantly changed his behavior and mood. However, before we talk about Jax and why it will lead to his abstraction, only after we refute the nonsense that Jax is an NPC, because in that case, Jax is not subject to this phenomenon. Although this theory is very popular lately and many people believe it, but just one post from Gooseworx completely nullifies all speculations. Jax has an officially confirmed age of 22 years old, and that alone is enough to realize that Jax is human. Before analyzing what happened to Jax and drawing a conclusion, let's talk about some hints from Gooseworx. After the scene with Kaufmo, we realize that this can happen to absolutely any character in the digital circus, and even though Jax seems to be the most stable, the official concepts tell us that even this character can feel sad and depressed, which was most clearly shown by the final of the second episode in which Jax stood there, distantly watching everyone else strengthen their bond with each other, and instead of trying to get closer to each other, he became more and more distant from them, and no one feels close to him. In the pilot episode, though, we never once saw Jax alone. He was with someone all the time, and even though I don't think he was very welcome, he was still with them. And now we often see him left out, and Jax realizes that the longer this goes on, the worse the consequences will be. And that makes him both angry and sad at the same time. A long time ago on my channel, I said that Jax only wants to seem cool, but in reality, he is an insecure guy who wants support like the others. But because of his original role, he doesn't get it. And this is clearly shown in the scene where Jax very carefully tries to hint to Kinger and Gangle that Kaufmo will not return to them. And apparently these events aggravated the state of Jax that led to those actions, and after we have understood all the aspects of such a character as Jax, and based on the facts of the first part of the video, I can safely say that Jax will definitely disappear from the series, and it's only a matter of time. Of course he is loved and appreciated by many people, but as we realized from the Gummigoo situation, Gooseworx has no authority and doesn't care what the fans think. and turning Jax into an abstracted monster would be the perfect ending to his life in the digital circus. Along with the release of the second episode, we were shown a lot of additional information, including deleted scenes of the new episode, which we will talk about today. And we'd like to start with the scene where Kane deleted Gummigoo from the digital circus, causing Pomni to have a panic attack.
I know you guys love your NPCs, but if I start losing track of who's a human and who's an NPC, who knows what could happen? Well, I'm gonna go drink water. It's been a while since I've done that.
And immediately we were shown that initially the creators make all the characters because all the environment around them is a gray background. And if you look at the models of Kane and Pomni, you can immediately realize that they are far from ideal. Pomni doesn't have any lightening and darkening yet, while Kane's eyes look very creepy as usual. And since no color work has been done yet, Pomni's panic attack scene looks twice as scary as it did in the second episode. Many people also expressed their satisfaction with the perfect movements of Fudge Monster and how well the creators did with the fluid movements in that moment.
I am the fudge. I used to live within the kingdom walls, but I was banished by that rotten princess after I ate too many of the delicious townfolk. Oh, they were so delicious. Sometimes I can hear them calling to me.
Again, as in the previous scene, except for the liquid in which Fudge is floating and the truck with the characters, nothing else is done. And the monster itself, even though it looks very close to what was shown in the new episode, still many details that greatly affect the evaluation of the work were not ready yet. For example, all of Fudge's movements that we see in the second episode were already ready, but their smoothness was finalized. About color correction, I will not repeat for the second time, but about the monster itself, I will say a few more words. We can see that originally the teeth were a little different color, and in the eyes we still do not see a lot of circles as in the final version. One of the most touching scenes in the new episode is the first meeting of Pomni and Gummigoo, as a result of which Gummigoo, from the main anti-hero of the episode, turns into a very upset alligator whose world is completely turned upside down, because he learned that all his life and memories are just an illusion that Kane invented.
Why are you trying to cheer me up? How does this benefit you at all?
I guess I just don't want you to feel like you're nothing. I don't want anybody to feel like that.
But I'm not even a real person. Would I even belong?
I'm sure you wouldn't belong any less than me. And I could use a friend.
And here we can already see a more pleasant image behind our characters. If in the previous scenes we saw only a gray background and incomprehensible blurring, in this scene there is an outline of the backstage in which Pomni and Gummigoo are caught. And from this, we can assume that this moment was animated near the middle of the whole process of creating a new episode. Since Pomni has been in development for a long time, it's obvious that Kevin Temmer and the rest of the animators have already had her model for a long time, and it's perfectly visible against the background of Gummigoo, who is still just an outline of the character, and his body is just gray. And also this scene shows the quality of the creator's approach to the second episode, because the interesting color correction in the final version makes me give them a standing ovation, especially considering how it all started. Now let's move on to the scene where Pomni hangs between two trucks and can't hold on, while Jax prepares to shoot.
Here it is. All right, Pomni, you just stay like that and I'll cross over.
Are you kidding me?
Nice going, Pomni. Now I have no bridge.
And here we already realize that at this point, the creators are closest to the final part of creating animation, because there are already present at least some colors, in addition to those that we see in the characters. And also note that the body of Pomni is no longer a classic fill, but has lightning. I also find it amusing that many characters in the intermediate version have very strange eyes. Also funny is Jax's weapon, which was originally green and Kevin Temmer got a bachelor's degree for it. And if you look at this scene in more detail, it gets a little creepy to realize how such movements came to be in his head. And now, we're back to Pomni and Gummigoo.
I don't know. We're somewhere under the map, I think.
Map? Why aren't you or any of your crew up here?
I'm not sure. Because we're not, NPCs?
NPCs? What are you on about? What are you people?
And this scene finally confused me, because in the previous similar scene we saw outlines of locations, and here, all this is not. But most likely Kevin Temmer in this way wanted to show us different stages of the process of creating animation. Because here Gummigoo, although far from ideal, but still has at least some color and separation into light and shadows. And now we move to the most visual scene that showed us the preparation for the eulogy on Kaufmo, in which took part absolutely all characters except Jax. And very soon I will make a video about this rabbit and tell you why he is the one on whom you should not be a fan. And in fact, it is Jax who can set everyone up at the most crucial moment. And if in the pilot episode it was not so obvious, the second episode proved it to us 100%. And now back to the scene.
Got everything ready.
Hey, you at least want to join us for Kaufmo's funeral? We like to have a little funeral service to remember the people who abstract. This one just got pushed around a bit with your arrival and everything.
It's the least we can do to honor their memory.
And the first thing to notice is that Ragatha's dress in the final version has a purple color, while the intermediate version shows us a blue dress. Also on the body and on one of Zubal's legs we don't see the usual stripes, while Jax is paler than we are used to seeing him. Now let me show you a funny fragment where the animator decided to have fun and showed us how Max and Chad can dance. We didn't see much useful here, but already here we realized that Gummigoo was the main priority, because his body against the background of other alligators remained gray, which means that his final model was left at the end in order to make maximum efforts to achieve the best result. Today, we have already talked about Fudge Monster, and now let's see how the creators worked on his movements. And already here the progress is obvious, but the most important thing I think is to show you how the other main NPCs of Candy Canyon Kingdom were created. I'll show you animations of their movements while walking and talking. Let's talk about the rest of the NPCs. I think that many of you noticed that in the pilot episode, the dummies were creatures that were concentrated in one place, and some of them even tried to kill Pomni. While in the second episode, many of them are very friendly characters despite the fact that one of them pushed Gangle during the release of Princess Lululalu, and we were shown all the animations of their movements. We realize that the animators have tried very hard to create even such minor characters as mannequins. Well, now it's time to show you the final part of my video, namely a huge number of cursed scenes that can make you smile. Write in the comments which of these scenes you like the most. Well, this is the end of our video, and I want to wish you a good day and patience while waiting for the next episode. Bye-bye, everybody.